Okay, I'm going live. It's Wednesday night, September 16th. I knew that. Time for Bible study. We've been in the book of Matthew. We are going through, for those of you if it's your first time, bless your heart if it's your first time. Um, we're in Matthew chapter 22. Jesus has just gone to the temple and acted up and turned over the money tables and yelled at everybody and then he went home, he came back, and now they had some questions for him. So the Pharisees, so he went back and just started teaching like normal. And the Pharisees came up to him and said, "Who gave you authority to do this? And you gonna clean that up?" But um, he says, he quizzed them like, "Well, let's before I tell you by what authority I'm doing this. When you saw John preaching, what authority did he have?" And that's, well, if we say God gave him that authority, then people say, why didn't you believe him? Because John spoke about him. So then why are you asking me if you believe that John really was from God? And we say he's not from God, then the people are going to get mad at us because they think he is a prophet from God. So they went, I don't know, which is not true. They knew what they felt in their heart, but I don't know. Well, this is, well, if you're not going to give me a straight answer, I'm not going to give you one either. And so, but then he started to tell them some parables, and he says, but this happened and that, and so he gives them parable, and this parable that he just finished was about the vine dresser, where he says a certain man had bought a vineyard and he built it up, and the vineyards had two levels where you press the wine on one level and then you squeezed it out on the bottom level, and he says he left people in charge of his vineyard. And then when he came back to collect the wine so he could serve it to people, first he sent his servants and they killed them. And then he sent his son, and he killed his son. And he says, and so what should I do with these what would he do? And they said, well, you have to kick them out because you gave them a project to do and they're refusing to cooperate. And Jesus is like, yeah, and that's what I'm going to do. That's what's going to happen to you guys because you aren't listening. So a few of them got upset, and a few of them said, well, what are you trying to imply? Now, he goes on and gives three or four more parables. At least that's how Matthew tells it. Matthew likes to group certain things together that he thinks are alike. So he gives another parable. Let's finish. So we're going to start from the end of last week's parable. In Matthew 21, verse 40 through 41, it says, therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? And they said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably and leave his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits in their season. Yeah, who will give him the fruits, and God left the Jews in charge. He said, I'm going to give you my word. I'm going to send you prophets. You're the vine dressers, though. You're not the end product. I'm putting you here so that you can be custodians of my word, but you're supposed to give it out. Just like you vine dressers, you're supposed to give out the fruits of the vine. You're not supposed to hold it. And he's saying the same thing to us in the church today. The church is not the stopping place. Our goal is not to make it to church each week. Our goal is to be the church in the world, to take what he's given us and give it out. So the wine was supposed to be given out. And so that's why he was mad. And it's like, well, if you're not going to give it out, I'm going to find somebody who will. And trust me, he's saying the same thing to us. If you're just going to go to church and soak it in each Sunday and put in your time and then keep it bottled up and you never give out that word, whatever that word is, I'm not saying you're supposed to go and preach to people, but whatever God is giving you, we're supposed to give it out. We're the light. He says, you're the light of the world. If you put your light under a bushel, anybody going to be able to see? We're the salt of the earth. If you don't, spread that salt around, then the meat will spoil. So that's what our job is, to go out. So he's saying the same thing to the church today that he said to the Jewish people back then. And in verse 43, he says, therefore I say to you, of Matthew chapter 21, therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. So he's warning the Jews, if you do not do anything with this and just keep it for yourself, then it'll be taken from you and give it to a nation who'll do something with it. So he's warning them. So they're not getting what he's saying. Are you picking up what I'm laying down? No, they were not. So in Matthew chapter 22, now we're just going on. It says, Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, now, so it's funny that they're just standing there listening to all these parables. I remember back in Matthew chapter 13, verse 10, the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? And he answered in verse 11 and said to them, because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. Now that's very interesting. Anybody who wants to know, if you seek, you'll find. But if you're not seeking, you're not going to find anything. It's given to you because you want to know, because you're hanging out with me, you're asking questions. They're just trying to trap me. They're just trying to get me in trouble. They don't really want to know about the mysteries of heaven. They already have their minds made up about what God is all about and what everything is all about. That, again, sounds like some of us in the church. And God wants to reveal more and go deep. But if you don't want to know more, he's not going to give you more. God's not going to waste his time. So he doesn't waste his time. Jesus is saying, because it's been given to you to understand the mysteries because you want the answers. You have a thirst. Blessed are you if you hunger and thirst, right, for righteousness, because you'll be filled. If you think you're full, then God's not going to fill you, obviously. He said in verse 12 of Matthew chapter 13, he says, for whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Whoever has a curiosity for the truth, a hunger or a thirst for the truth. This is all having to do with what Jesus was saying. Blessed are the poor in spirit, not those who are, because then they'll be filled. But if you just think you're full and I don't need no more, then people stop serving you, right? It's like, I'm full, okay. The hungry get served, and the disciples had a hunger and they had a thirst for knowledge, and the Bible's always telling us, you got to seek, you got to knock. If you knock, the door will be open, but the door's not just going to open and hit you in the face. If you knock, it'll be open. If you seek, you'll find. But if you're not seeking truth, if you're not hungering and thirst, that's why I appreciate those of you who are listening in on the Bible study. It's like, ooh, I want to know more. And so God says, okay, I'll give you more. But everybody says, I've heard it before. I don't need it. Okay, so what you have will be taken away then. But because it's not, you're either growing or shrinking, apparently, in God's eyes. He says, for whoever has, to him more will be given, he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has, will be taken away from him. So if you think, I'm fine, I'm good, then you even lose that little bit that you have because you're not building on it. It's like muscles. If you're using your muscles, they're getting stronger. But if you just sit sedentary, your muscles there's a shrinkage thing that goes on. So, and God's saying the kingdom of heaven kind of works that way. Therefore, he says, therefore I speak to them in parables. Because seeing, they don't see. Hearing, they do not hear, nor do they understand. They think they see, and that's why they're blind. They think they know it all, so that's why they don't know anything. And the more we say, Lord, I don't have all the answers. The more we say, I know, I already know. Okay, well then I can't tell you anything because you already know. But if we wake up every morning and say, Lord, teach me something, let me know something new, I don't have all the answers, then God's very gracious and wants to give more. So he's speaking to them in parables so that they can't say he never told them anything. When they stand before him at judgment day, you never said that to me. Well, yes, I did. But it's a waste of time to speak plainly to you because you're just going to resist it. Because if I say, you're a non-believer. No, I'm not. You're argumentative. No, I'm not. You're just going to argue with me. So if I speak it to you in parables, then at least you'll take it in. But if I just tell you plainly, then you're just going to get mad and say, "Oh, you're lying." So he gives them this truth, but so that at least they'll hear the whole thing. And on Judgment Day, they'll be able to say, "Well, you did say this, isn't it?" But if they really had a thirst for knowledge, then they would get it. these parables, they go, oh, I understand what that means, but they didn't. Okay, so he's speaking of another after he just did 2 or 3 parables. I got more, and he does. He has like 3 more parables before they finally get mad and leave. All right, so Matthew chapter 22. There's another parable. Matthew chapter 22, verse 2. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son. And he sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Again, he sent out other servants saying, tell those who are invited, see, I prepared my dinner, my oxen, my fatted cattle are killed. They're having a barbecue. All things are ready. Come to the wedding. Now, their weddings during that time usually were 7 days, and they fed you. When somebody got married, especially somebody wealthy got married, it was a 7-day feast. And so you were invited. You know, that's why he keeps sending out invitations, because you still had more days before, don't worry, we got 6 more days, just come on. But they wouldn't come. Now, in Mark, he gives a similar parable, but that was more about grace. This is more about judgment. In the one that I'll get to in Luke, I'll explain how it's more about grace. But this one's about judgment. So again, the weddings were, whenever somebody put on a big feast, it was 7 days long. I'm reminded of Samson in the book of Judges. He went out and found a wife. Now, this is not the Delilah that he ended up with. This is the Philistine woman, because Samson just had really poor choice in women. That was not his strong suit. So he found a Philistine woman and sent his parents, oh, I like her. She was a harlot, bless his heart. And so his parents said, okay, and they went, and they're going to have a big wedding feast. In Judges chapter 14, verse 12, Samson is, so he's had this wedding feast, and his wife to be shows up with 30 men, and he's, oh, who are you? Hi, welcome. So okay, I guess you're friends of hers. And so in verse 12 of Judges chapter 14, it says, then Samson said to them, well, let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And this was another, so there were 7 days, the weddings were always 7 days. And then it was up to the bride and groom to provide entertainment for their guests. And one of the rewards he had come up with is, I'm going to give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. Linen garment meant pajamas. Those were night clothing, so like pajamas. And changes of clothing were day clothes. So I'm going to give you 2 sets of clothing. Usually the bride and the groom gave all of his guests 1 set of clothing. But it's like, I'm going to give you 2 sets if you can answer this riddle. I don't know if you remember, but she bugged him for the answer to the riddle. So it's okay, I'll tell you the answer. And then she went and told all of her men. And then they said, on the 7th day, we know what the answer is. And then Samson got mad and he killed a bunch of people. Just was kind of like when you've heard about these parties in Inglewood. No, I'm kidding. So, my point was that these wedding feasts were 7 days long. And you always provided garments for your guest. So, he's saying in Jesus' parable, they're inviting all these people to the wedding, and they're saying, no, we don't want to come. In fact, Matthew 22, verse 5 says, they made light of it, went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business, like they didn't even pay any attention. In the parable in Luke, now I'm saying this one is about judgment. Jesus told the story earlier, but the point of it was grace. In the one in Luke, and when Luke tells us, and it happened earlier in Jesus' ministry, it says when the king threw the feast, in Luke chapter 14, verse 16, it says, then he said to him, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many. So this wasn't a wedding, it was just a supper. And sent his servant at supper time to say to those who invited, come, for all things are now ready. But they all with one accord began to make excuses. So, and they do, and the excuses are hilarious.
I gotta wash my cat's
wash my cat's hair. I gotta see a man about a horse. Yeah. Baby needs new shoes. Anyway, but they're like hysterical excuses. Like, oh, I gotta, So anyway, there's just stuff they gotta do. And so the servant, it says in verse 21 of Luke 14, so that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house Being angry, he said to the servant, well, then go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind. Just bring anybody in. So he brought those in, and then the servant said, oh, we still got more room. And well, they're going to the highways and the byways. This is where you find the robbers and the thieves, because they wait in the highways to rob you. But he's saying, bring everybody in. So this is God's grace. Like, even though you didn't deserve this, I'm going to invite you to this wedding, because the original people I invited, they didn't want to come. So I'm extending my grace to everybody. Bring in the halt, the blind, whoever. So the point of that was, see how gracious God is. That's not his point in this one. This one. So going back to Matthew chapter 22, remember, everybody, they just made light of it and refused to show up. So Matthew chapter 22 and verse 6, it says, and the rest seized his servants and treated them spitefully and killed them. So instead of showing up, or just making an excuse, when the servants went out, they took the servants and killed them. You remember that? But when the king heard about it, he was furious. Instead of saying, well, then go find other people, he says he sent out his armies, he destroyed those murderers, and he burned up their city. So this one is about judgment. Jesus is trying to explain that God's is putting out an invitation for you to be part of his kingdom. And if you ignore the invitation, there's going to be damage done. So he's warning them. And this is right after he's cursed the fig tree as a warning, and he turned over the tables. He's about to tell his disciples how, see this temple here, not one stone of it's going to remain. He's trying to warn them about the coming judgment. The temple had been destroyed once before. He's trying to say, judgment's coming again, because the Messiah is here that you've been waiting for, and you're ignoring him. So he's saying, in this story, the king didn't just say, okay, well, the king said he destroyed their cities. He destroyed them all. He burned up their city, and that's the judgment that's coming. Okay. Now there's a part 2 to this parable. Part 2. So Matthew chapter 22, verse 8 says, then he says to his servants, well, the wedding is ready. I've already killed all those people like Samson. The wedding is ready. But those who were invited were not worthy, meaning they wouldn't show up. Obviously, they were worthy of an invitation, and so we're like weird with the word worthy. We say, oh, I'm not worthy. Well, no, none of us are worthy of God's blessing, but he's giving them anyway. So he's saying the invitation's there, but since they wouldn't receive it, they made themselves unworthy. And so, therefore, go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. So the servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Now, this is his appeal to the Gentiles. Jesus is saying, the original invitation went out, but you killed the prophets. You killed those that I sent to you. So judgment is coming. The city's going to be destroyed and burned down, which is exactly what happened in 70 AD. This is about 33 to 30. This is actually, is it about 35 AD right now? And 35 years later, in 70 AD, Romans came in, destroyed the city, burned it down. Jesus, all God can say, well, all I can do is warn you. And it's up to us to listen or not. Okay? So then he's saying to them, the invitation is now going to go out to people you've never even imagined. So he's talking about the Gentiles. So send out the good and the bad. And that's the one, I would say, the one cool thing. There's probably a bunch of cool things about God. But one of the cooler things is God sending his invitation out to everybody. He's not deciding in advance who should hear it and who shouldn't. Everybody gets the invitation. Now, he's about to make a point of those who respond and those who don't respond. But he says, I invite the good and the bad. Do not prejudge people. And sometimes we can prejudge people about who we think is worthy to hear the gospel. Oh, well, you don't look like you got it together, or you're homeless, or you're this or that, or you're drunk, or we sometimes can judge people. Oh, look at that wonderful person over there. I'll go to that person and give them the gospel. And God's saying, nope, you have to give everybody good and bad. You don't get to judge who it is. I'll just say, because the invitation is open to everybody. Now, verse 11 of Matthew chapter 22 says, but when the king came in to see the guests, because now the hall is just full of people, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. Now, it was tradition for the wealthy people who were getting married to supply wedding garments. So you would pick your colors, whatever they were, purple and gold. Go Lakers. Okay. Or and then you would give all of your guests the garment, just like Samson had offered these wedding garments to his guests. You give them all, and you assume they're going to put them on. This is and whether it was a wedding, it was a dinner, whatever it is, this was a Jewish tradition. If you were throwing a big party, you bought everybody clothes. Oh, that'd be really interesting if we still did that. Every time you threw a party, you had to buy everybody clothes who came to your party. In 2 Kings chapter 10, Yehu is now king. Yehu, he was king of northern Israel right after Ahab and Jezebel. Once they were taken care of, Yehu was now king, and Ahab and Jezebel, they worshipped Baal and let all the prophets of Baal run the country, and that's when Elisha said, "Oh no, I'm the only person who hasn't bowed my knee to Baal and Baal." My friend Don Van says Baal, and God said, "No, you're not the only one. I still have other people." Because we always feel like I'm the only one who's serving God. No, you're not. Okay, so Yehu's now king, and in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 22, it says, "Then Yehu sent throughout all of Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come." So he sent an invitation. I'm king now. All you worshipers of Baal, come on in. So they came into the temple of Baal, and the temple of Baal was full from one end to the other. And he said to the one in charge of the wardrobe, "Bring out vestments for all the worshipers of Baal." So he brought out vestments for them. So this was a tradition. You throw a big dinner and invite everybody, and you have to dress everyone. Now, of course, once he dressed them, he sent his armies in and killed them all. But at least they dressed pretty, and they died looking good, and in their coffin they were all matching. Okay, so anyway, the wedding, the king comes in to his hall, which is full, and he passed out all of, and says, "Oh, everybody gets clothes and all that," except he finds one guy who is not wearing the clothes that everybody wear. Verse 12 says, "So he said to him, 'Friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless." The friend was speechless, not the guy. The guy, the king just spoke, so he wasn't speechless. But the friend, and it was an insult. It was an insult. If I give you this garment, I can't believe you showed up. Now, God is so repetitive. I'm going to remind you of a story, because when Jesus tells these these are stories that the Jewish listeners had heard over and over throughout history. And I say this on purpose again, that God repeats himself so that we will recognize him. We'll go, "Oh, that's God," because that's just like in such a story. That, like, and so if you remember in the book of Esther, the king Ahasuerus, that's how I'm going to say it. He was a Persian king. He probably was Xerxes, but they was calling him Ahasuerus. And he'd taken over and captured, this huge swaths of the Middle East, and had captured the Jews and had taken them to Shushan, and had just conquered a whole bunch of different people. And so he's throwing a wedding feast. He had his bride Vashti, and he wants to show her off. And the wedding feast lasts for 7 days. So in Esther chapter 1, verse 10, it says, "So on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcass." There were 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. So these 7 eunuchs, we're going to be dealing with all these harem women and etc. And so you had to have eunuchs because you want nobody getting pregnant if you weren't doing the impregnation. Is that a word? Okay. So he said, "Hey, you 7 eunuchs, go bring in," verse 11, "bring in Queen Vashti before the wedding, wearing her royal crown and her robes, all the stuff I've given her, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold." Now, she wasn't from that area. Where she was from, they had different colors and wore different stuff. And so, but he had conquered her people and he wanted to dress her in his colors from his kingdom. Now that you're in my kingdom, you're going to wear what I want you to wear. However, verse 12 says, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by the eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious and his anger burned within him. She didn't want to put on his clothes representing his culture and his people and his kingdom. She wanted to keep on what she had. So the king is really mad. And so he's consulting his eunuchs, like, what do I do to her? Because I can't believe this woman from this other culture is refusing to put on the wedding clothes and all that I bought for her. So at Esther chapter 1, verse 19, they said, well, if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus. Let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So she was banished. That's the punishment. You won't put on the clothes I want you to wear. You won't put on the royal garments. She was banished, and she could never be in his presence again. This story happened this way because God is making a point, and he wanted the Jews to recognize the situation and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. If the king has asked you to put on his robe and asked you to put on representing his kingdom, you don't say, no, I'm wearing what's for my kingdom. Because that's what happened to Vashti. She got in trouble. She was banished from his presence. So back to this story that Jesus is telling, where the king walks in and he sees this person. You're not wearing the colors that I want you to wear. Okay, so Matthew chapter 22, verse 13. Then the king said to his servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So since he won't put on the colors, since he's just showing up in what he wants, in his regular clothing, and not putting on the royal garments that I have for him, then you banish him. Now, this is why it says in Isaiah 64:6, but we are like an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are like filthy rags. That's like showing up at the wedding in rags. Because now remember, earlier in the parable, Jesus said, go out and find the lame and the blind and the halt and the robbers and all these people, poor people, and bring them in. So he doesn't want don't come in your rags. You come in what I'm clothing you with. And this is symbolic, obviously, of God clothing us with his righteousness. We don't enter heaven with our own righteousness. We don't enter heaven saying, oh, look what I got on, and this represents my kingdom. Because it's like, no, your righteousness is like filthy rags. It's like showing up at a wedding with filthy rags on. And that's what Isaiah was referring to. That image is, you don't come in, you put on what God has for us. We want to put on his righteousness. We make it into heaven, not on our own merit, nothing that we did. We can't show up and look what I got on and look what I did. The only way to get to heaven, it's like passing a test. You have to have 100%, and only one person ever had that 100% grade, and that was Jesus. And so we all get in on his grade. We all get in on what Jesus did, and that's why we present Jesus before him and say, I come before you in Jesus' name. I pray in Jesus' name. He gets all the glory and all the credit, because it's nothing that I do to deserve it. It's nothing I do to earn it. I can't come and show you and brag on myself. It's all according to what Jesus did. So the host wants to clothe them in righteousness, and the person saying, no, I'm going to sit here in my filthy rags. He said, well, no, you're not going to sit here. You don't have to go home, but you have to get out of here. So he takes him, and you bind him and send him away. Now, I want to tell you part 2 of this Esther story, because here's where Esther comes in. So if you recall that Mordecai, who's Esther's uncle, finds out that the king is looking for a new bride, because I don't want Vashti anymore. I've banished her. I've sent her into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So he somehow brings his niece before the king, and the king sees her and falls in love with Esther. And so, but he doesn't know that she's Jewish. Well, but she's wonderful. I'm going to put her in my robes. I'm going to put her in my robes and marry her. And she becomes his favorite. So Haman, meanwhile, who works for the king, is jealous of the Jews, that they're getting all this attention. He's jealous of Mordecai, jealous of everybody. So he comes up with this way to get rid of the Jews. And this was the first time in history, but it's not the only time, that the Jews came close to total extinction, because all the Jews had been captured, and Mordecai tricked the king into putting out a decree that would have killed all of the Jews. And so I mean, not Mordecai, Haman, who's mad at Mordecai and Esther and that all the, and the king has no idea that Esther's Jewish, but Mordecai's come up with a way to trick him. So he's put out this decree and tricked the king into it, and he's just feeling good about himself. And he's about to get rid of Mordecai also, and he's constructed this gallows, and Haman's just walking around like, popping his best. He's feeling great. So the king was, oh, why are you so happy? And in verse 6 of Esther chapter 6, so Esther 6:6, Haman came in and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Meaning, I really want to honor somebody. And I love this because it says, now Haman thought in his heart, well, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? He must be talking about me. He loves me. He likes me. He really, really likes me. And verse 7 says, and Haman answered the king, well, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king is ridden, which has royal crest placed on his head. So not only do you want him to dress him in your colors, but give him your actual robe. And again, this story happened this way for a reason. I'm the king. He says you should put your robe on him, like Jesus is putting his righteousness on us. It's his righteousness. So for the person who you love and you delight in, put your robe on him. And the king's like, yes, that's a great idea. So he says, well, surprise, I'm honoring Mordecai, which made Haman crazy. Not him, not Mordecai, no. And in fact, Esther, when she came into the feast, said, King, I want a favor from you, and anything that you want. And this is, you got to get rid of Haman because he's about to destroy all the people. He said, well, no, he's going to destroy the Jews. Well, I'm Jewish. Whoa, can't have that happen. So he hangs Haman on the gallows that he had built, and that is what happens with those when we're following the devil. We get hung on the gallows that we've built. The trap that you try to set for somebody else is going to just be on you, and God makes sure it works that way. We look and we think that people are getting away with stuff, but if you're the sort of person that lies, then maybe you get somebody tells a lie on you. If you're the sort of person that is trying to, whatever you're trying to do, it just comes back on you. That's why God said love, and that love will come back on you. Give and it shall be given to you, because God just designed the universe so that whatever seeds you plant, that's what you get. And so because Haman was always trying to be crafty and evil, and then he got hung on his own gallows. Meanwhile, Mordecai gets blessed. And so Esther chapter 8, verse 15, it says, so Mordecai went out from the presence of the king, because now he's rewarded, in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. So he got to wear the king's robes because he was doing what God told him to do. He had been honest, and he had been loyal, and he was rewarded. So we see that if we do what God is asking us to do, the reward will come. It sometimes will look like whoever it is getting ahead, and that person, and I can't believe that they're not winning. God has his eye on everybody. And if we just stay in his presence, he puts his righteousness on us. And so Jesus is telling the same parable to them. I want everybody who's invited to my feast to put my robes on them. Take my yoke up on you, because my burden is easy, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I want you to take my righteousness on you, and don't present your righteousness to me, but take the righteousness of my son, and I'll clothe you in royalty. I'll clothe you in robes, and I'll bless you that way. So we come before him, before his presence, in his robes. So Jesus then says in verse 14, after he's finished his parable, how the one person who refused to put on his righteousness was kicked out. He says, for many are called, but few are chosen. Now, I've heard just the strangest interpretations of this, but Jesus had just told a parable where many people, the invitation went out to everybody, but only a few chose to actually take him up on it. So when he says many are called, a few are chosen, it's not like God only chooses a few. Many are called, but only a few actually choose to take him up on his offer. So many are called, but few are the chosen, would be a more correct interpretation of that sentence. Many are called, but few are the chosen. Few actually choose to take him up on that offer, and it's a shame. It's a shame because it's extended to everybody. So in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, Peter's writing a letter, and he says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the pilgrims of the dispersion in Pontus, in Galatia, in Cappadocia, in Asia, in Bithynia, who were chosen, it says the elect, but who are chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ. Grace to you and peace will be multiplied. So he says he's sending us out to the chosen according to the foreknowledge of God. God knows in advance. That's the good thing. We're surprised at who shows up at a party when we give it. But God already knows who's going to choose. And for those who he already knows is going to choose. Now he puts the invitations out to everybody, but he knows who's going to choose. He already has a plan for that person. He starts, and you may not get saved until you're 50 years old, but when you were born, he started that plan in your life. You might get saved at 70 years old or 20, whatever, doesn't matter. God knew what you were going to do, and so he begins his work in your life. And the people you run into and the situations you encounter are not a coincidence, because he has a predetermination for how you will eventually end up. You will look like and be clothed in Jesus' righteousness. In fact, in Romans chapter 8, verse 28 and 29, it says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are the called according to his purpose. So we know that all things ultimately will work together for good. It doesn't say that every single day is just wonderful and sparkling and, unicorns are dropping from the sky, which would hurt. He's saying all things ultimately work together for good to those who love God and to those who are the called according to his purpose. It all works together according to his purpose, not according to ours. We have a purpose. We have a motivation. We have an idea how we think everything should go. It doesn't work according to how we think things should go. It works according to how God says things should go, because he's putting the pieces together of the puzzle, and he knows better than us what's going to make us happy, what's going to make us fulfilled, because he's designed us. So he knows how the situation to put us in that is best for us. But we don't. We want to be in the position of least resistance and have the least amount of problems, but it's the pressure that creates the diamond, right? It's a lot of times the things that we're going through that God is showing us and putting us through that makes us who we are, that brings the diamond out in us, right? So that we're truly valuable in the world, so that we're truly a blessing to other people. So he says, all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. So Jesus was just the firstborn among many brothers. But what he's decided, what he's determined, I foreknow in advance who's going to choose me, who's going to be the called. I know who those people are, and I've predetermined that you will be conformed to the image of his son. When people look at us, ultimately they will see Christ. I'm gonna make sure they see that diamond in you. So I'm gonna put you in situations where you're forced to forgive, where you're forced to love, where you're forced to show kindness and graciousness. I'm going to put you in a situation where you're forced to be down on your knees and pray for other people and to intercede for them. I'm going to make you stop worrying, because you just put you in a situation where you think, well, can't worry about me now because nothing I can do about that. And you'll learn to stop worrying. You'll learn to stop gossiping. We're eventually gonna be conformed to the image of his son. Now we're gonna totally look like Jesus, once we get to heaven, clothed in his righteousness. But he says, step one, let me put my righteousness on you and teach you not to depend on your righteousness, but to depend on his. But know that we will ultimately, those who he foreknew, will be ultimately conformed to the image of his son. We will look like Christ. And uh, and that is why, because people, why is this happening to me? Because God's at work. God's at work. And so let us not be those who think we know everything. Let's say, well, Lord, I don't know what this is, but I know you have a plan. I know you have a purpose. If there's something you want me to do or say, I'm willing to do that. If you want me to speak up and say, stop that, or so I'm not saying we have to always just lay back but the point is we start off each day saying, Lord, what do you see from me today? What do you have for me today? Do you want me to go out and speak, or do you want me to do nothing? Do you want it? This is your day. This is the day that the Lord has made. I didn't make this day. You made it. So I'm just going to rejoice and be glad in it. Excuse me. So I'm going to stop there because it's like 3 more parables in this chapter, and it'll take me 40 minutes to get to each one. So I'll just stop a little early, and I will see the rest of you on Sunday. We're still in Genesis. We're dealing with the Tower of Babel, and or I will see you next week, and we will finish these very interesting situations that Jesus had with the Pharisees, with the Sadducees, with the Herodians, and with the scribes. There were 4 different sets of people that were attacking Jesus all the time. And the Pharisees, he gets on them first. The Herodians about to step up. The Sadducees are about to step, and I'll explain all the differences in these groups next week. So God bless you, and I will see you and talk to you. Well, I won't see you. I keep saying that, but you'll see me next week at 7 o'clock. Thanks. End video.